I will not forget how exalted and grandiose the reputation of Bicycle Thieves felt before I ever saw it. It seemed to be, when researching via the internet in the later 2000s, the film most cited as the greatest ever made, along with Citizen Kane, The Godfather, maybe The Searchers, and the original Star Wars films. The day I eventually watched Bicycle Thieves, I was really anxious. I felt as though if this film didn't live up to the hype, then my expectations for how exciting life might be could falter. And I did get Bicycle Thieves. I understood why it was considered a great film. I felt as though it was a great film, but I didn't feel it coming close to topping my list, which, rather different at that time, would have entailed films like Pulp Fiction, Empire Strikes Back, Brazil, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or maybe Akira. The latter three are still close to the top of my list, and I still really love those first two. Empire I still quite adore. The thing is, the reason why Bicycle Thieves was considered so great was due to its relative quaintness, as well as where it fit into history, how people would have assessed it in, say, the 1960s, when the canon of cinema was more limited, and many classics of world cinema may not have been as exposed to the English language discourse at that stage. I do find it easy to admire and enjoy Bicycle Thieves now. The finer definition one views it in, even a DVD might not have done this film justice. Only a screening of the print or a sufficient Blu ray does it its proper due. Cinematographically, it is a marvel, and the film's naturalism and observations on morality may not be intuitive to younger film devotees, who are briefly poisoned by the insistence of quantification of text demanded by, say, high school English indoctrination. Oddly enough, watching it between the ages of, say, 8 and 14 is more ideal than 15 to even 21, because at that age I would assume that one is first attempting to gauge the power of certain more, say, atypical of cinematic priorities compared to commercial Hollywood or even independent, abrasive, action based or horror focused films. At that age, one is kind of skeptically assessing whether newer films one views are matching the impression of the formative classics upon your experiences. Just letting it, without too lofty expectations, wash over oneself is the best way to view Bicycle Thieves. The idea that this film is to be equated with the most powerful experience of all time is cornering it into one subjective, becomes potentially narrow, idea of the most powerful experience from their perspective. The impact is that the premise of Bicycle Thieves is pretty modest, although in such a basic undertaking, the film actually dispels a large profundity, though it seems like a rather simple trace on paper. Spoilers: man needs a bicycle for work, finally is able to purchase one, it is stolen while he is on the job, him and his son look for it across post-war desperate near-realist Rome, and then in his exhausted despair, our protagonist attempts to steal another man's bicycle, both forcing questions of this player's presumed morality and the potential sympathetic motivation of the initial thief of Antonio, our protagonist's bicycle. Perhaps the thief of his bike had his own motivations. He is also a member of a family which would certainly want for money just the same. I will compare and contrast it to a film I really, really got when I first saw it, when I was 14, and would have at any age. Very immediate, very epic, very familiar to my sense of what was considered really sublime cinema, and then some. It was Coppola's formidable Apocalypse Now, the film between this and Ackerman's classic Jan Dielman on this TSPDT list. It didn't immediately occur to me that Bicycle Thieves could be ranked. Forgive that gross term being used in relation to feature films, when it mostly really ought not, alongside works like Coppola's Apocalypse Now, and to this day I might not put it on a par with Apocalypse Now, in a way I would for the best when considering Italy cinema, films from Rossellini, Visconti, Fellini, Antonioni, Pasolini, Leone, even Bertolucci, The Conformist, Spider Stratagem, and Before the Revolution are the works of a genius, though I detest some or at least two of his other feature films. And I certainly feel that way about the horror guys too. Maybe Bicycle Thieves wouldn't be near the top of those lists for myself, though I don't like doing so in any strict manner, more just as a stream of association in my head for the fun of it. I would sooner claim Umberto D. and Garden of the Finzi Continis are among the most worthy films from De Sica, actually, although relative to its ambitions and the end result, I can entirely understand a claim that Bicycle Thieves is one of the most consummate films of all time, one of the most wholesome, one of the classic films whose intentions are most noble, and that is why it has been so celebrated over the decades. That ought to be obvious to any adult who views it, I would hope so, or just assuming what a film like that could mean to a generation of Western Europeans who grew up or who attempting to make a living in the aftermath of the destructive Second World War. Bicycle Thieves' place in history ought to be obvious, only questioned by the misguided ignorant, even if subsequent generations, while still lauding it as worthy of some degree of classic status, no longer place it near the top of our hypothetical speculative lists. In being so clean and motivated artistically, it is extremely impressive, as well as being a superlative act of film direction in a purely clinical respect. Bicycle Thieves is seemingly wounded by the notion that a piece of art's quality must be crassly quantified, whether it is the puerile rating out of 10 or the project of ranking the greatest films in some pseudo objective sense. Bicycle Thieves feels a bit lanky, kind of, compared with the incredibly elastic metric which determines the most classic films of the cinema canon. I'm not even citing Bicycle Thieves as entirely worthy of the enormous praise it seems to attain, at least in an ethereal sense, compared to the sheer number of other highly impressive films released all across the globe over rather many decades, although I feel as though it was worthy of its place in history and must never be removed from any prospective canon. Think about how we might receive it if it were a lost or unknown film from a less celebrated director. We would all champion it as a lost classic, and some might even claim it as the most pure, honest, and beautiful film ever made. So I do dig Bicycle Thieves, and no matter the circumstance, I think if we're being honest and not feeling impulsively reactionary, we can all appreciate it, those of us invested in the history of the film medium just as well, thoroughly.